A lot of lives, a lot of lives have been lost this year, and I don't know. I saw. I know. I think it was earlier this year. I saw some comments from the leaders of government, saying the same thing as usual. I saw the other day. I looked at the news and I saw the police saying the same thing again. Community involvement. We just keep repeating these things, and to be honest, I've never really gotten a good answer on what it means to all hands on deck and community involvement and all that sort of thing. And I don't imagine that getting an answer will be satisfying either, because getting a thorough answer will be satisfying either, because there's nothing that stops us from doing those things that actually need to be done, being the way that we actually need to be in order to make a change. And I made a distinction between doing and being, because it's not that there's anything that needs to be done to stop something else. It's that we need to have a revelation of our shortcomings and an acknowledgement of the limitations that we've set on ourselves, and understandably so. It's not condemnation. It's not anything to be ashamed of or anything like that necessarily. It's just recognizing how life itself moves us in that direction if we allow ourselves to continually react to things. And a deeper reality is the fact that we enter into a world that that has its own sort of trajectory. A child born today is going to be born into a stream of movements, a stream of developments, geopolitical, national, communal, familial. All of these things are already wheels in motion, and because we don't take the time to take our mind out of the circumstances it presents itself to us, as it thrusts itself on us, we just keep looking at the level that we're at, and we can't really have the sort of impact that we would wish for by simply reacting. But even the things that we wish for are, we could get all sorts of complicated about it, but that's what I talked about. Even if it was to be articulated, what it really means, community involvement, in the ideal sense, I don't think it would be. I think it would miss the mark, because even what we want, tying things back, even what we want is so reactionary. It's just, there's something that's happening. We don't want it to happen, and we're willing to pay whatever price not to have it happen, except if the price is changing ourselves and changing the whole of society. And so basically, we have a desire to have a quick fix and do the patchwork sort of situation, and it's going to ease the burden now. It's going to give you a sense of peace and security now, but it's going to be well, we're going to have to face it, right? And I want to probably say that at the end of the day, nothing can really ever be stopped. So all our attempts at this and our attempts at that really won't ultimately change things. Things will be undesirable at one point in life, and they will be desirable at another, and that is how life works. But I guess part of that too, I can answer by saying that there's that difference between being and doing. Again, if you're being who you're being, then you have a whole sort of different experience, right? You might be exposed to the same thing, but you have a different experience, because you're not in the course of doing things for a goal. you're just being, it's coming out of you, right? But more so what I really wanted to address was looking back at 2015. I hope I have these dates right, but I think I think I have them right. Right, 2015. I would have done a talk. It would have been the lecture, the emancipation lecture at the Brimstone Hill, right? And I think the title of the that was given to me to speak on was why did I even begin that statement? Because I really didn't think about what the title was, but I know it had to do with freedom, right? It had to do with freedom. I think it's something about freedom and equality. But basically, the point that I wanted to make is that where I brought up the title is because I wanted to put a little bit of contrast between what the title was and how I approached it. But why was I getting by? Stop playing. Anyway, I anyway. I knew right there. I sure as soon as I done tape this thing, it gonna be there. But anyway, but yeah. So it was about freedom, freedom and equality, and I approached it speaking about democracy. Right. So let me make sure I stay on track. The point I'm trying to address is that when I was discussing freedom, I went straight to the heart of it, so to speak, the heart of what we've constructed. Let me put it that way, because it's not the heart of it, but it's the heart of what we've constructed, democracy itself. And I would say I made a call to recognize that we're not finished. It's we've created this system, and it's not perfect. And frankly, nothing can be perfect because perfection is actually love, right? And that's not in a what airy fairy you know, caterpillars and what is it? Sugar is sweet and whatever. I say right. Girls, sugar and spice and everything nice sort of situation. I'm not talking about love as something that we talk about and we can define. I'm talking about love as something that just comes out of you naturally. Something that it doesn't enter your consciousness because you don't even realize what you're doing. You're just doing it, right? It's not thought of. It's not measured. It's not calculated. That's the kind of love I mean. Love that you don't call love because it's beyond words. But that's what we gave up as humans, and so we built all sort of things. There's socialism and its forms, and there's capitalism, and we, especially right now, if we're looking at the global stage, there's a lot of arguments about the West, quote unquote, and capitalism, democracy, and all of that, and really we worship this thing. We worship what we've created, but we don't acknowledge that we haven't. It's not perfect, and that's not to say that perfection is possible, and certainly it isn't. Again, perfection is love. That's the only thing that can really be complete, right? But we in praising the success of it, we dismiss the flaws of it, flaws that can be addressed and can make things a bit more palatable, acceptable, let's put it that way, for those who don't benefit as much from these things. And of course, that there will be a contingent of people in anything that don't, and that's where again love is the perfect thing, the divine thing, because we bridge those gaps because of love, out of love, right? So anyway, I went straight to talking about democracy, and this was 2015, and I specified the date because 2015 I was speaking actually about our elections too, and our elections saw, as usual, 50-50 splits. The fact that you have to speak about landslides means that you tend not to have that sort of situation. So you qualify by saying a landslide when you have a victory of that sort. I'm not talking about the election having been that, but I'm saying elections of the democratic sort tend to be split fairly evenly. Otherwise, you wouldn't need the qualifier of a landslide victory, which is this big thing. So if democracy on average is 50-50, the notion that I was communicating in the talk was that if indeed there is such a stark difference between the representatives that are vying for office, then and people are voting based on this, then you find you would be creating a situation, or left with a situation, where whoever gets voted in, those who didn't vote for that person are more or less effectively disenfranchised, because you wanted to go north and the country has voted to go south. That's two completely different things, if indeed that's the way that that ideologically the candidates and the policies they'll bring are. So fixing that, because that's a problem, especially, and you more so see it as a problem if you're on the opposite side of things, and I suppose you more so see it as a problem if indeed the differences are so stark, which is a whole other question we could ask. But the point is, in the course of the talk that I was given, I made that point, and I tried to give an example of what left and right might mean in terms of our emphasis on, let's say, tourism versus something else, right? And I don't think that example was the most potent. It might have been the example I gave might have been a very applicable to our context, but it might have not have been the most potent. Unfortunately, 5 years later, 2020, we came to a much more potent example, where the options before us were forced, not necessarily here, but globally. Again, speaking globally, democracy is not a petition on a vision thing, right? It's not a Caribbean thing either. And so we had a situation where we were talking about forced vaccination. We were talking about all the implications of it. When I said that, I'm thinking in other ways, socioeconomically, socially. You could even emphasize that. Psychologically, that's a serious one. But even digging into the thing itself, the medication itself, and the fact that it would have been experimental, and it is up to this point, because you have to give things time. You don't know what effects will be in such a short span of time. So to have this sort of thrust toward forcing on people something that is going to, this is not even an event that you're subject to. This is not even just lockdowns. This is something that's put into your body. And there was even advocacy saying, grow up, do this thing, we have to move on, and that kind of thing. And the thing that was mind blowing is that we don't know the consequence of this thing. And if we look, there isn't much talk about it, and that's not just specifically here, but globally. There are a whole lot of things going on that that might escape us. But if you're looking at it, you realize that there have been implications. There have been medical implications, and so those who are advocating for that, and this is no condemnation on that either. We everything, and this is again why I bring up these things when I say I went to democracy. What I'm getting at is that I try to go to the heart of things. I'm not concerned with events. I'm not concerned with people. I'm not even concerned with ideas. Getting to the heart of it and recognizing what we are doing, what we are allowing ourselves to do, and what we are allowing to come of our actions and inactions. Inactions more so in the sense of the things that we prioritize. We prioritize things that could be left to themselves and the things that ought to be put to the forefront are left for the wind. Like, for instance, in the idea of democracy, we emphasize the right to vote, the right to, say who I want to lead me, but you're basically saying who you want to dictate you, because we leave the policies to them, right? So rather than sit down and work out among ourselves the whole the dilemma that's in front of us, rather than we try to find suitable trade-offs in inquiring into life and the things that we're trying to do, we just leave all of that to somebody, and like a parent, leave that to somebody. We as adults leave that to somebody, and we make sure that we have the right to choose that somebody. That's not really different to dictatorship, but that's a different conversation if we delve into that. The point is that we came to a place where we had those, and have, because there are actual things that are happening still. There are people whose elderly loved ones and all sorts of things, and even young people who died during this pandemic, COVID pandemic, and they had to die alone because you couldn't be in the hospital with them, and all sorts of restrictions were put up. And so there were real events that transpired that, if you're following the information that is actually out there, you'd recognize could have gone differently. And again, these are questions of extremities of left and right, up and down. Let's not think left and right in terms of political terms, right? But we left that alone. And like I said, I was talking about democracy at the point of talking about freedom. And there's much more I can say about that, especially in today's time. But my bringing this up is bringing it up again in the sense of what's happening here in terms of violence as well, because we don't see the importance of speaking about democracy. Democracy, it's like an idea, like, depending on what subject you did at a university level, and maybe even before, you might have heard the word, but we don't really sit down and talk about democracy. We raise issues about things that need to change in our elections, but we don't raise the question of what are we electing and what's the whole movement of this thing. It seems a waste of time. It seems to people. I've had people say this in more words or less words. I don't have the time to sit down and think about the things to that extent, because they're real problems. But if you don't understand the problems, how do you know you're not creating more with your solutions, quote unquote? But again, those are things that could be gone into much more deeply. Cursory speaking about things, we don't see the need for looking at the systems we've built, and we find ourselves then in a situation where your livelihood is and your health is hanging in the balance, and there's nothing you can do about it, and there's no recourse, all sorts of other things, because especially when we're speaking about recourse, you have a situation where the manufacturers of these things are protected from litigation. How, right? You have now wars that are being waged, and all sorts of things could be said, right? So you have vaccination, you have wars that are being waged overseas. Again, this is a global perspective. You have at least 2 wars we can speak about that are in the American media, Russia and Ukraine, and you have Israel and Hamas, and perhaps even broader than that. But the question of who funds these things in terms of taxpayers, the question of whether taxpayers have a say in whether or not these things happen, all of these are questions of democracy. And more I can say more and more on those things. But again, I really want to keep on track. And so, so we have in front of us, and we've always had, in the sense of when things happen, we always have the question put more prominently before us of what to do, and community involvement and this and that. But what do these things mean, and are we willing to go to the heart of these questions to ask what do we need to change in ourselves? That's the thing that I emphasized when I spoke about crime before, and when, the one or two talks that I did, and anything that I said, I emphasized getting to the heart of the matter. What have we built, and how much of a divergence, a deviation from what we've built are these things? And even I just brought up war, so I could even say, it's curious, this whole public health approach to crime and violence, because there are two let me see. Let me work this out as I speak about it, because I've never really spoken about it, but it's so obvious to me. This notion of deterrence, and then you have the public health situation, and deterrence on the national scale of international violence, which is war. And so you have to establish deterrence by using violence, but yet we don't want people in gangs and violent circumstances and situations to use violence, because we know that the greatest predictor of an act of violence is a previous act of violence against that person, or their sphere of relationship, let's say. And so deterrence is violence, but violence is what predicts violence. Come on, man. This come on. Just don't even. But the point is, these things are real. These things are really there. These aren't ideas and theories for paper and for sounding educated and all that kind of thing. To whom it is, but hopefully to whom it is won't be for the rest of people. A deterrence in the sense of being put off by what seems to be a waste of time. It's not. It's the most important things. If you give your car to a mechanic because they know what they're doing. If we want to solve problems or fix problems or address problems, or however we phrase it, and phrase it in the context of reflecting greater understanding, we need that understanding. We need to understand our own self, what it is informs our own behaviors, because it's not different for other people. It's just degrees of separation and circumstances that make things as they are. And some of these things have explored. And it's interesting because that talk that I did in 2015 informed the book that I published in 2017, Understanding Us and Them, which kind of goes into that. If you look at the talk, you'll actually realize it and it's on YouTube. It's when you look at it, you realize that it's what was taken as the beginning place for the book. The very same approach to it, just took all of that and expanded it out. And it's not that I had all of that refined information in at the point of the talk. The talk was just a beginning, but it's me looking at these things and continuing to look and continuing to inquire and getting greater and greater clarity. And the greater clarity that you have, you also have greater compassion, because you understand how things get to where they get. But if there's a lack of compassion on our end, and there's a lack of compassion on quote unquote our end, there's a lack of compassion on society's end, and a law-abiding society, let's put it that way, because we're trying to put a difference between the two. On law-abiding citizens end, and there is a lack of compassion on the end of those who are engaged in violence. Again, the whole book was about the big hand. There is no difference between us and them, which is the point. As much as I'm putting a difference, I'm putting it because we put it, And I'm putting it then to point out that there is no difference, because what informs their choices are things that inform ours. And it's really the one of the things I brought up at the talk too was the idea of how much frustration can we take. And again, going back to some of the examples about 2020, how much frustration can we take? We did we And you see, let me make sure it be understood as well that when I say we, persons, me included, all of us, persons, when we act, and we act in the sense of, we're speaking about certain things, and like we're advocating certain things, we do so. This is where things like choice and all these, freedom of choice and identity and all these things, this is why they need to be understood, because we advocate these things, and it's not a reflection of good or bad people. It's a reflection of intellectual process, right? You zero in on what's going to happen, how your business is going to fall apart, how the country is going to fall apart, how the whatever is. You're focusing on your own belief that this thing is safe, and your belief that we should do XYZ. And because we allow ourselves to harbor opinions and judgments, and to cling to them, it's the harboring the harboring is bad enough. You can have it, you don't have to harbor it. Clinging is just another big level of don't do that ness, right? But we cling then to our, especially we continually talk, right? That's one of the things we need to recognize as well. We continually talk, we nurture our ideas, and in nurturing them, we get to a point where we're blinded, right? And one of the things is, we have, there's a luxury in saying the things that I'm saying. These are at different levels. There's a luxury familially, there's a luxury communally, there's a luxury age-wise, there's a luxury nationally. There are luxuries at all sorts of levels. And I say luxury because the people who are in the thing it's not easy for them to think like this. One of the things that came to my mind recently, especially as I really look at what's happening across the globe, is thinking, let me see if I can frame this the way that I was thinking about it in a sort of interesting way, is that if your two hands were tied, then what could you do about something? And the answer might be nothing. But the question is, what if what if you had more than two hands? So the assumption that you can do nothing, your response that you can do nothing if you had two hands are tied, is that you have two hands. But what if you had four? What if you had more? And what I'm getting at is that life, this is one life. The whole world as we know it, and as it was, and as it will be, is all one life. And my two hands are two hands, and your two hands are two hands. And even right here in the Caribbean region, there are things happening, like in Haiti, for instance. It's so far as we know, it's a jungle right now, a war zone, right? And so we are rich right now that we have the time to even listen to the degree that we've listened to any of this, to the degree that I can make this in such level-headedness, such peace of mind, and such peace of, listen to this, you have some rain, you have some birds, you have quiet otherwise apart from a couple of vehicles, especially because it's a Sunday, and this ain't what going on in other places in the world. And so my two hands are free, and the two hands are free of people here, and they're people's hands are bound in different ways. Mine are bound in some ways, right? But when we see ourselves as I, me, and mine, and we think of ourselves from that level, We don't recognize that, when we talk about, and there are a lot of people who harp on slavery. The reality is, if we were enslaved, and when we were enslaved, our hands were tied, right? Our hands were tied. And again, you could go back to that question of democracy. Our hands aren't tied to ask the question of what's happening in our democratic processes, what could be improved. These things that are transpiring, there's nothing that stopped people, let's say in America, for instance, from sitting down and looking at the democratic. There's some, oh my God, denousness, things that happen where you're looking at people in Congress who are senile, and not just senile. One of the persons I'm thinking about has died, and from age, as so far as I know, perhaps I'm incorrect there, but so far as I know, I think it's just a progression. It's the age, and next one has been retired, not officially moved out of the position, but he has frozen literally. A question is, and not even just that face. It's like it's and we have our own crazy things here too. We had our crazy thing. I think it was just the last election, and we had some crazy things that transpired before that one, right? And of course, we had the one way back when that we like to point to as well. We all have our things, but that's the point. How do we live so comfortably with these things and argue and bicker about these little changes? I saw something about term limits. I don't know, term limits. This island is so small. If you have somebody who has a good capacity to lead, and I didn't say we have one, I didn't say we had one, I didn't say we will have one. I'm saying if that is the case, we're putting these things in place that might limit that potential from being harnessed. Do we need that, or can we change the entire system? And I've done some work to answer my own questions about how things might be different, and the way that I've approached it does answer those questions, such that we don't have to worry about term limits, we don't have to worry about boundaries, we don't have to worry this ceasefire thing in the US, where rather than choose ceasefire that would spare lives and actually, you know get aid into to Gaza in the Hamas, the Israel Hamas conflict. The US has been standing in the way of those things, and right, so like at the UN, voting against, vetoing and voting against all sorts of things, like the ceasefire, and more recently, recognizing Palestine as a state. And I'm thinking, like, I don't know. I when I speak, I'm speaking about so far as I know, right? So I'm not taking everything into consideration, and I'm definitely not saying that I know a whole lot. I don't, right? I really don't. But maybe comparatively, but I don't, right? But I don't see why there even needs to be a vote on recognizing a state. It's like, if you have a definition of a state, these are the things that qualify you as a state. If we say, it could get complicated, maybe you're suggesting that there's a terrorist entity group, even perhaps quote unquote state, that is in existence, and we're not going to recognize them. Then let whatever measurement determines what a terrorist is, and be the measure that determines whether or not somebody is eligible. But I don't see why there's a vote. Like, a vote is a show of hands. Again, what is this thing about hand lifted? Why isn't the process sufficient? Why don't you just make sure that you have the checklist, so to speak? Whatever, even if it's not just checklist, you have to go into deeper inquiry. You have to do reports and all sorts of things, and then you do that. Okay, why is there voting? And again, these kind of things, and I should also say that my thoughts on what how things might be a bit different in the democratic process are just my thoughts. And again, they come from a certain level, a level that's not as profound as it's profound philosophically, but it's not profound in terms of the intricacies of people and managing people, especially when I personally have lived a life of believing in managing yourself and preoccupation with managing yourself, self-governance. So, and that's a prerequisite, and maturity is a prerequisite for self-governance, right? So maturity is what's important to me, and that maturity in contrast again to education as well. Education by which we as a society mean aggregation, accumulation of information, right? Knowledge for us means, for society means information. Knowledge isn't, there's a reason why ancient times they spoke about knowledge, like to know somebody means intercourse, because it's not just, you know, to have notice of something, to know something in the sense of have noticed it, or yeah, I heard that before, but it's not integrated into you intellectually, philosophically, and we'll say spiritually, but I don't mean spirit of, you know, all that religious context. I'm speaking even just spiritually as getting out of the intellectual process into how I described love before, where it's not a thought, it's just you're being it. You don't even notice it, you're just being it, right? So these ideas about one nation or other nations, when you have the body sitting down and deciding based on maturity, which is what it's predicated on. My thoughts about the democratic process is predicated on maturity. So it's predicated on participation and maturity. I'm not going through the process. It's also out there. I can share those things via whatever means are available, links here, there, whatever. But it's two things. It's participatory, which means that we're voting based on ideas. Not even based on the idea itself is the vote, right? And then and then the we could all sound off our ideas, but if we're not mature, then what's the point anyway? So it's predicated on maturity, but it's participatory, and participatory doesn't mean I vote for this person. Participatory means here are my thoughts on this particular situation. We choose based on maturity. And so when we talk about ceasefire, maturity, when we talk about, several hundred, not hundred, several, I think in 15, like 1,200, right? So that's what I mean by 100. But like 1,200, let's say, lives were lost in the initial attack on Israel by Hamas. And you have something like 33,000 people. They killed the response. It's like there's nowhere deterrence, right to respond, no philosophical, no mathematical, no biblical, no nothinical discussion, reasoning can make that understandable, unless there's a difference of value of lives, which you listen to some interviews and some discussions and you realize that while they did dismiss the idea that they're putting different weights, it's automatic. It's like you have 1,200, let's say. So because it's somewhere in that region, the numbers are disputed. It was a little bit more than 1,200. I think it was 1,200 something, if I'm not mistaken. But then they themselves narrowed that number down, and most recently I heard something like 1,100 and something. So I'm saying 1,200, if I'm not mistaken, right? And then they broke that further down to say, a portion of that was military persons who lost their lives, and so it's like really 700 and something persons. And this isn't something I've fact checked, but it's something that was communicated. But by a source I suppose would be reasonable in their process of getting information. But I'm saying the maths, no matter how, even if you 10 times it by 10, it's like, watch, we got 10 times the right. You could say you got 10 times more money in the bank. Banks consider they have 10 times more money than they have. We got 10 times more right to kill, or we have the right to kill 10 times more people. Y'all done past 10, my youth. What is this? This thing is crazy. So I'm saying, when you get to the point then of saying, this is voting and all this, maturity would say ain't nowhere this is acceptable, ain't nowhere, we at the very least need to stop, right? That's what ceasefire is. Just cease. It's not, I need to look up those two words, cease and desist. I presume desist, if they keep saddling those two words with me, cease is to pause and desist is to stop altogether, right? So I would suppose so. But either way, you understand where I'm coming from. Cease means stop. You've made a point, right? 33,000. You've made a point. Let's stop there, and let's pause there, right? Cease, pause. Maturity would say that ain't nobody who has any kind of maturity or operating from any kind of maturity can dispute. That's indisputable, right? So maturity would dictate that. They say no, this person vote against I don't care if everybody, if it's just one person, that's the whole idea of the process. The idea of the process would be, they say a majority thing. They say who got qualms with and problems with these people and that. No, this is maturity. Maturity itself dictates that this thing ain't making no sense in terms of your right to defend, because you get back into it, it's like those people are, how many of them are civilians, and we have numbers, right? How many of those are civilians, people who are just like the people that presumably died, and I say presumably again because I made a division between who are actually military. So even though it wasn't a military base attacked in Israel, by Hamas, apparently, if indeed the information that I came across was so, then a lot of the persons who had, like half of the persons who were killed were military. It doesn't make a difference, but we're discussing the notion of civilian lives being lost, especially discussing it as this was what was the idea, that you'd made war with civilians, and now we are doing the same thing. It's so even on that basis, it doesn't work. It doesn't know. And so I'm saying maturity would. So you have the UN and its processes, which is a democratic process. This idea of voting, right, is a democratic process, with some caveats, but there are caveats elsewhere. I think you have this electoral college in the US that has, like, I think it has some sort of, not vetoing power, but like a vote means more. Your vote means more than mine. And so it's similar with where there's somebody that can veto, then their vote means more. But again, maturity. What's this veto thing? Even if the veto thing is there, right? It probably can't work. But either way, we're saying maturity over majority. Majority rules isn't. If I'm giving my sovereignty to something, right? A process, democracy. I would rather that process be a process of maturity, mediated by maturity, not mediated by majority. So I'm saying these things are there, and I was talking about this at this point now. We're 2024. A year from now is going to be a decade ago. That's crazy. That's how time flies. It's crazy. I was talking about it then. 5 years later, 2020, we had seen some things, and during that time, again, a lot of things could be said about what happened there, because in terms of money, in terms of getting your money from banks, in terms of freezing accounts, all sorts of things are happening in this world right now. The climate thing, and there are places in the world that are banning vehicles. There are places that are banning cash. There are mass surveillance. These aren't conspiracies, right? And it's crazy to hear people using words, and when I say people, I mean mainstream media using words like conspiracy for things that are being proven. It's one thing to say the conspiracy, even if you want to dismiss it beforehand, but even after the fact. So that's, democracy is already out the window, right? We could have looked at it We could have looked at it before. It needed to be looked at before. I'm not saying that I knew what was coming. I don't need to know what was coming, because to live integrally, to be humble really is what I define it as. To be humble, you know, to be intellectually honest is what I mean by humility in that sense specifically. Is always the that's the thing that emanates from love, but it's also the intelligent thing if you really look at it. But because I see this thing need to charge, so but that's I use I use that example as an example of the importance, not perhaps not the urgency, apparently not the urgency, but the importance of being humble. We know the reality that there are things we need to look at with reference to ourselves. There are things that happen all the time, but we don't look at them as being the fallout of the things that we've created. We look at them as being people's behavior, people's choices. I'm not talking about even yet the violence specifically. I'm talking about the whole relationship. And even if we want to get direct, we can say even the degree of frustration that people are willing to, are able, because even what is the alternative? We always look for a way to get people to stop doing what they're doing, but what's the alternative? If we feel as nations we need to kill each other to prove a point, and that's actually literally being said right now, right? Even in this, there was something with Iran more recently, and so there's this thing bandying about the word deterrence. If that's the case, that we need to do that, then don't these guys rest their souls also need to do what they're doing? No, I don't. That's not my answer. That's not my response. But I'm saying when we call for community, what do we mean? And if we call for community, and that's how we do, call for community, and we do it like clockwork, do we care? Do we really care? And if we don't care, then the same way that we moved from the things that I was looking at that made me say, this process needs to be looked at. The same way we can look now and see where this process is going. And what will happen will be new to me, just as it's new to everybody. But how much of it could have been a little bit different? At least in our lifetime, it could have been a little bit different. Both in the way that we experience it and the actual things that come to be. Because again, if you change certain things, then certain things can't be not right now. They will be eventually, because all things will be. Everything under the sun will be under the sun. And it's not my business. Personally, it's not my business whether or not it's there, because that's a different level of life. Life is sorting itself out. I can just be as I am in an intellectual, honest way, and that's it. But while we focus on our fears and our desires with reference to violence ceasing to be, there's the option to look at some of the things that we can identify as having come about by particular means, by particular negligence, not necessarily by our own personal, or at least, let's say, as a condition of having inherited it. And I'm really going to leave it there, because this is probably going to go at any point in time. But just looking at that, I think I've said enough. Just really being honest about what it is we know within ourselves, and the same way that when we're asking people to stop doing what they're doing, we're asking them to stop doing what they're doing. We're asking them to put their fears aside about their own life lost and other people's lives lost, and other of their loved ones' lives lost. And it's the same way that we need to put our fears aside about what it is will be allowed to happen while we take this approach of letting love lead us in our thoughts and our talks and our attempts to turn our attention to and do something about what's happening in this situation of violence.